Attorney General Bill Barr confronted at a closed-door meeting with law enforcement officers over these comments he made about systemic racism.
Does the Trump Justice Department seek to end systemic racism and racism in law enforcement? I just need a yes or no answer.
I don't agree that there's systemic racism in the police department.
Specifically,
generally in this country.
Joining me now is Linda Williams, president of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives. Good to have you with us. So you're only a couple weeks into the job, right? Into being put in this position, and you were invited to a meeting with the Attorney General with a couple dozen other folks in law enforcement. No real agenda here, just a chat. But you did take that opportunity to address the Attorney General's comments from last month. What did you say? What was his reaction?
Well, good morning, first of all, and thank you for having me.
Good morning.
New to that position as national president, but not to that platform. And so the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, NOBLE, is part of a network of major law enforcement organizations. And so exactly, he invited us to a chat. There was no specific agenda. And so I patiently let everyone speak. But just 2 weeks, actually, on the very day that I was sworn in, I heard the testimony of Attorney General Barr that stated just what you played, that he did not believe that systemic racism was real. And so I prompted him and said, sir, just because one does not exist, just because one does not experience something, does not negate its existence. That law enforcement is a microcosm of society, and it's to be real. But you can't resolve a problem unless you acknowledge a problem.
And how did he respond to that?
He tilted his head and he responded with a question. Did I think that all of law enforcement was based in systemic racism? I said, we can't throw a blanket on everything, but we can't deny it. But just the very essence of it permeates throughout an organization and make it a racist society. And let's be real, that systemic racism is part of our American culture. It's embedded in every facet of life. Systemic racism is just as American as apple pie. And we have to acknowledge that. And I challenged him as the Attorney General, who's the chief law enforcement officer for the entire United States, to have a closed mind. I challenged him, and I spoke personally that as a 30-plus year veteran in law enforcement at the federal level as well as on a local level, that I know it to be true. And for him to not acknowledge that is for him to not face reality of where we are and what this country consists of.
You know, what you're bringing up, the refusal to accept that reality, right? And my apologies, I'm forgetting who said this, so I apologize. But as we were having these difficult, necessary conversations, right, that I think became more prevalent over the last couple of months, I was struck by someone who said, empathy means believing the other person's experience, right? You have to believe what they told you they felt and experienced in that moment, even if you weren't there. And so what's fascinating to me, too, is him sort of, tilting his head and listening, but the point that you make, I think, speaks to another point that we heard him kind of double down on in that testimony, and I want to play that moment as well.
Okay.
Blacks will not be treated even-handedly. They will not be given the benefit of the doubt. They will be treated with greater suspicion. At the same time, I think it would be an oversimplification to treat the problem as rooted in some deep-seated racism generally infecting our police departments.
To your point, it's not about so much a deep-seated racism infecting police departments. It's the reality that deep-seated racism has infected the United States of America for hundreds of years and has been allowed to fester and grow. And there is still apparently this block, even at the highest levels, to acknowledge its existence.
Absolutely. And as a law enforcement person and of a leading organization such as NOBLE, it was a personal affront because, again, I pointed out to him that you first have to recognize that there's a problem and that you can't solve that problem if you pretend there isn't one. And even more so, you can't resolve it by making excuses. You got to acknowledge it. Mm-hmm. So I said, I challenge you respectfully. You have to acknowledge this because it negates everything that I stand for, who I am, And that's why this country stands where it is if we don't acknowledge that there is a problem and that we have to make a change.
What was the reaction from the other people who were part of that meeting?
You could hear a pin drop. There was nodding, and a couple of other colleagues jumped in after I opened that Pandora's box. But everyone listened attentively, but you can't deny reality, and you can't be afraid to speak the truth. And that's the boldness of being in the position that I'm in, that you have to have the courage to speak truth to power. At the end of the day, he's a public servant, as am I. He's a man with a title. But if we don't talk, if we don't communicate, we can never find resolve to the problems that exist.
It's a great point. We really appreciate you being with us this morning. Thank you for those decades of service as well. And listen, I'd love to continue to follow this with you and see where this goes, especially as you now have taken the reins as president of Noble. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.